This presentation is a slideshow for introducing our students in business law to legal citation. First, a warning. I'm at home working, and we have 4 little critters. Right here is Buddy, Max, Daisy, and Daxter. Look at that smile. Anyway, sometimes they will hear something, and sometimes I'll hear nothing at all, and once one barks, they all bark. Anyway, I hope that doesn't happen, because it's very annoying and distracted and sometimes scares my students to death. Alright, moving on. In this introduction, we're going to talk about what is legal citation, why citation is needed, what do citations tell the person who's reading a document, and when do you cite to a source, what standards of citation should be followed, and I have 3 examples actually, of citing to Florida. What is a legal citation? A legal citation is not like a traffic ticket. I like to jokingly tell my students that. Citing your sources of law is important to your success in legal writing because it helps to, it tells the reader exactly what source you're telling the reader you looked at. So it's an identifier, and the way they're designed is to be even a more exemplified identifier than just, oh, it's the Florida statutes, or it's just a statute. So we'll go into real briefly into that in this presentation in a couple of slides. In your courses at SCF and beyond as well, you probably have already been applying a standardized process of citing your sources of information used in your reports or essays that you've written in various courses. Citation refers to a set of rules to follow when you're writing your papers, and citing your sources in different disciplines can be done differently, and that's why it's important to look at this from a legal citation standpoint. Why is citation needed? It's needed to help the reader of your document. The rules of citation serve as a standardized process and it helps to level the playing field for all of us. If your instructor does not have to track down, for example, bad links to sources that you provide, or your instructor doesn't need to wonder where sources are used and how, those types of distractions can help makes the instructor lose concentration of the job. Your instructor wants to assess the information you give and how well you understand it. That's the instructor's role. But following the rules of citation is critical because it helps to avoid plagiarism. Plagiarism is the use of facts and ideas from another person that's not just general knowledge, like the sun rises in the east and sets in the west. That's general knowledge. But anything that's not general knowledge needs to be cited, or you're possibly running into problems with plagiarism, and you don't want that, right? Right. So the ideas of other people need to be sourced. You need to give citations to those sources. You need to give the sources of citation in a format that your reader, presumably your professor, is going to understand. So, on the note of understanding, what does the citation tell the person who's reading the document? When your instructor and colleagues read your paper, your in-text citations tell the reader many things about the source you're applying to your written thoughts. In-text citations are the ones that, like maybe at the end of a sentence where you are within the text of your document. I'm not talking about the citations at the end of your document when I say in-text citation. What you're telling the reader is where the information came from and whose words you're using. And as I noted earlier, a key purpose of citing in the first place is to make sure you give proper credit to the source you're writing or quoting from. Citation is the only way to prevent plagiarism. The weight and it just is. The weight and persuasiveness is also identified in the citation. The weight, how is it a statute, or is it an opinion of someone that or idea of a person? Obviously, a statute has greater weight than someone's opinion. about something. That's an example. It also, the citation also helps the reader see the weight and persuasiveness of the source of authority you're writing about or quoting from. For example, if I am writing a essay about a poem by Robert Frost, well, of course, primary authority about that poem would be something written by Robert Frost about the meaning of the poem. But if scholars read the poem and write opinions about what they think the poem means, that's a secondary source. So when I cite to the source within the text of my document, I'm telling the reader, oh, this opinion is of a secondary source, not of the writer of the poem itself, himself. It also tells the reader the currency of the source, and what we mean by currency of the source is how old it is. And in law, that's very, very important, because we use dating in the citations to ensure that the reader knows we're looking at the most current version of a rule of law. Or if we need to apply a past version because maybe a situation happened 5 years ago and the statute was different then and we're in litigation about it now, we would want to, of course, apply the statutes of the time of the wrongful conduct. So the reader has a lot of reasons, different reasons, for needing to know the date of the source and also the validity of the source. We need to make sure we use reliable sources. And for example, if you're researching statutes, you would want to go to a government site to look at the government version of the source as a source, instead of to maybe even a lawyer's site where the lawyer has copied and pasted the same statute into his or her blog or something. The validity of the government source is obviously going to carry a greater weight of persuasiveness and validity than that of the attorney who just here's a copy of the statute. All right. So what standards of citation should be followed? Well, citation has in different academic disciplines, they are using different citation standards. In the law, we use Blue Book, which is, it's called Blue Book, and the title of the book is The Blue Book, A Uniform System of Citation. We also use ALWD Citation Manual, which is Allwood in short. And courts and on the state and federal levels all have additional rules that guide us in citing to legal sources. Those would be in their own set of rule books. Business uses the Publication Manual of American Psychological Association. We call that the APA manual. So in this class, because it's a business law class, I'm suggesting you work with your APA citation. However, if you're a paralegal in the paralegal program, I permit students to use the Allwood citation system, and because they need to be accustomed to that for their discipline. All right, so that's an example of how the disciplines of citation work. So the citation refers to a set of rules to follow when writing your papers and citing your sources in disciplines. And like I said, there are many different standards of it. APA is an example. Some of you in your lit classes might be using MLA. There is another one, Turabian, which is a shortened, condensed version of the Chicago Manual of Style. We have the different rules because different audiences have citations for different needs. Remember the last slide when I was explaining what we're trying to demonstrate in our citation? We're trying to demonstrate a lot of things, but different disciplines want to know different things. For example, if I'm reading a legal essay by a student, I said, look up gun control statutes or look up gun control law and give me a nice little write-up, 500 words or something about that. The sources that student would cite might be statutes, federal and state, or even some United States Supreme Court opinions, possibly even some state court opinions from the courts, that is. And so when I'm looking at their paper, I'm looking at the sources they use to see if the student understood that, probably case opinions from the United States Supreme Court are going to carry more weight and persuasiveness. That's a legal discipline. However, in business, for example, trying to think of a good choice. Leadership is a business principle or discipline of business of the business discipline. And let's say a student is writing a paper on transformational leadership. Well, in business, you would use the APA style, but notice that in text you only cite to the author and the year. So if I'm citing to literature written by, for example, James McGregor Burns, he's one of the leading experts in the area of transformational leadership writings. So I, as a business teacher on leadership, would be looking at which authors did this student apply in doing this paper. So the point is that I'm wanting to make sure you understand is that we use different ways of citation in different disciplines because of the different needs of the disciplines, specifically the reader of the work you do, like your faculty and colleagues, to understand what you're citing to. Okay? Now, when do you cite to a source? I told you earlier, if it's not an opinion, if it's an opinion, or I shouldn't say an opinion, if it's just ordinary knowledge, like the sun rises in the east and sets in the west, then it's not necessarily a source to cite. You would not need to say, I read this out of some science book. Although you could find a physical science book and cite to the source that way. But generally speaking, that's not necessary for that type of everyday information. However, the two questions you always need to ask is, where did the information come from, and whose words are you using? So sometimes you'll use direct quotes, or which is verbatim text, exactly what the author of the source you're looking at wrote, and sometimes you'll paraphrase. You should be paraphrasing more than you should be direct quoting, by the way. And paraphrasing is when you write that author's words in your own words. So if it's not just everyday knowledge and it's something that you did read from a source, you need to cite the source in both of those circumstances. You just do it a little bit differently when you do a direct quote, which is verbatim text, because you use quotation marks around it and you tell the reader exactly where you found that verbatim text in the writing that you're referring to, the source that you're referring to. In paraphrasing, you don't need to tell the person the page, for example. You only need to give the author name in APA format, the author name and the year. Okay, so some generic guidelines about citation for this course. The picture you see here represents one of the sections of the citation reference guide that I've provided to you in the course. This is this is just a piece of it. This is not the whole page. I just cut out, did some snapshot of just the one, a clip of just the one piece of it. It's based on the 6th edition of the APA Style Manual. Remember, that's the American Psychological Association, which is the type of citation manual used in business. And you can see some examples here to some commonly cited sources, like an internet or a government publication from the internet, constitutions, statutes, rules like rules of court, cases, books and treatises, and legal encyclopedias. Of course, I'm providing you sources that are often used in law because this is a law class. As a general rule, APA citation begins with the author name, followed by the date, then the page numbers. The essential rule is to provide sufficient information so that the reader can locate the reference easily. When citing to rules of law, it's standard to include the year of the rules consulted and the publisher of the rules you've consulted in doing your research. An example of the year would be this one given here, the Florida Statute, section 61.529, 2012. That means I'm telling, if this were in an essay or something, I'm telling the reader that I looked at the 2012 statutes, not the statutes from 2014, and certainly not from 1998. For example, this case, Brown versus Board of Education, famous case of the United States Supreme Court. It was a case decided by the Supreme Court in the United States Supreme Court in 1954. This is an example of a legal encyclopedia, and the year it was published is 2012. So this is an example. The dates are examples of the currency of the information that you found in your research. Let's see. When using the online versions of rules, like the statutes, for example, think of that as like a database. So in your assignment where you're asked to go online and find a reliable source to a reliable source of the statutes, you might find a government source, like maybe the Florida Senate is a government source of the statutes. And what they'll do is they'll organize the statutes by year, because that's how they're published. That's how they're enacted. New statutes are added or subtracted from every year, so we go by on a yearly basis. If you treat that statute, that website, like it has databases and choose the year, you'll see that there's one for 2014, one for 2013, and they won't go all the way back to the beginning of time, but they will go back pretty far. So that's the standard you have to remember there. So that would be the year you put on the citation, like 2014, if you were looking at the 2014 database. Don't confuse that with the year that the web page is updated. The date that the web page is updated can be completely different from the date that the statutes are enacted. All right. The main idea is provided in this guideline sheet that I gave you. So let's practice one. Let's look at the next slide and practice. Here's the Florida Senate website. Here you can see a database I've chosen. Find statutes, and here's a little search bar where I can do some searching if I want to. This is for bills. This is before statutes are enacted. These are just for bills, so ignore this if you go to this particular website. Find the statutes 2014. I've chosen that database. I could click this button and see that there are other databases from 2013 and before. I just randomly chose a statute to show you what this looks like on this page. This is the statutes are organized in a previous presentation. I told you they're organized by title. The titles are further broken down by chapters, and this happens to be the section 4. It's section 4, look over here, section 4. And so as noted in the previous slide, the main idea of the general guidelines is to show you an example, the general guidelines that I provided, the resources or cheat sheet or whatever you want to call it, to use. So say you do some research to find a statute and you need to cite it in an assignment for your business law course. And so your assignment says, find a statute of Florida that defines the requirements of foreign incorporated associations. So you go to your trusted source online and you find that statute in the business organization's title, and you know that because of the title right here. And you locate the rule of law, and let's say you, after the research on that legal question I just rattled off real quick, you found this statute 622.04. Now you need to cite this cite to the statute. You need to tell your professor what this where to find the statute herself. So you pull out your trusty guideline that I provided you, and you see an example of a statute. Look at that. Statute, and here's the example. Florida Statutes, section 61.529, 2012, period. Now you need to duplicate this format that I just showed you here. You want to duplicate this format of the statute and using the statute that you just researched for. So here you go. Now I just broke down that guideline to a smaller page so it's easier to fit on one slide. So the source is a statute, The APA manual 6th edition format would look like this. Now I'm going to take that, I'm going to write that statute that we found earlier, 622.09, and you can see now I have Florida Statutes, section 622.09, and the year following. And notice the period at the end, that really does go there. When you're citing a statute all by itself and you're not typing it in a sentence, the period does need to be at the end of the statute. Just a hint. So this is the format, and it follows that format. So it was just simply a matter of doing the research, finding the statute that applies to the research, and making this statute citation look like this statute citation. Simple as that. Here's an example of a different type of citation called Allwood, and this is for paralegal students to use. And the reason they use something different is from one of those earlier slides on the disciplines. And they use a little different format. They get to save some keystrokes and type in FLA period space, stat period space, and this is called a section symbol. You have to use your word processing software and go to the insert ribbon, and you insert symbol. Another space follows that, followed by the statute and the year and a period. All right, some students will ask, Suzanne, I need to have more than one statute cited. The answer to my question involves consecutively numbered statutes. So this is an example of APA format of Florida statutes over a consecutive span of statutes in the statutes. So 622.01 through .09. That's telling the reader that go to chapter 622 of the Florida statutes, section 01 through section 09. In Allwood, we would do the same thing. All right. Here we have Florida statutes where we are not going consecutive. In other words, this one is pieces and parts of this section of statute. So I'm in 622.01 followed by a comma. That means and 622.07. Nothing in between, nothing after, nothing before. And the same is true of this one. And notice that when we're citing two consecutive statutes in Allwood, using Allwood format, we use more than one section symbol. So we would use two section symbols instead of one. So it all kind of makes general sense if you follow the guidelines. And you know, I'm trying to keep this simple as an effort to keep everybody aware of how important citing your statutes is and showing the teacher that you're working with what you're doing and where you found your sources. All right, so in conclusion, these are the points that we just covered, and we even got a little chance to use some examples, so you can take those with you. And also to take with you on the next slide are some good places to go for some help if you need it. So right here you can find some APA style websites to help you improve, or if you have questions, or you can find some Allwood citation manual style information on here. An excellent source also then, if you're just on the internet using keyword searches for help, is to use library libguide. So run the term libguide and the search term libguide, and then whatever, APA style or Allwood manual, something like that. Libguides are library guides, and they're very, very useful for helping everyone. I use them even as a non-student to help me with my citation work. All right, so the dogs were quiet, yippee. So y'all have a good luck with this assignment. If you need any help, let me know.